again, if you have questions as we go through, please feel free to put them in that chat box, and let's begin. So we suggest that you begin the application process about 12 months before you want to enroll. And of course, the first question you need to ask yourself is, what kind of program do you want to pursue? And we encourage you to cast a pretty wide net at this point. And I'll go through some questions in a minute that you can ask yourself to try to discern exactly what it is you want to master and what kind of degree is really going to deliver what you need. And coupled with that really is a lot of research and interpersonal connectivity and a chance to get to know a lot of different programs and people. But you're also going to need to keep track of all of the deadlines and connections and programs and things that you're looking for. So we suggest you build a Google spreadsheet, an Excel document, a list, however you keep track of information. Build something out at this initial stage that will let you keep track of all of the moving pieces and all of the deadlines. We also really encourage you to look at your financial situation and the financial aid you might need in parallel with the application process. It's not something that can really wait until after you've applied or been admitted to a program. You have to do the two of them simultaneously, or else you're really going to not set yourself up for success. So as you try to discern among programs, what sorts of things can you ask yourself to try and figure out what is right for you? And we suggest really 5 questions. The first, of course, is, what do you want to study? And that doesn't just mean a particular discipline, but looking at the structure of a program, the curriculum, the kinds of courses that you have to take, the kinds of courses that you can take. Are you looking at something that's very proscriptive? In this year, you'll take this, and the next year you'll do that and that. Are you looking at something that's really flexible and lets you marry together all kinds of different things? And where along the spectrum do you want to be? And what is really, again, going to deliver the kind of education you need to set yourself up for success? Next, of course, is, are you qualified? Most schools are going to publish online their average scores. And it's important to keep in mind that those are averages, average age, GRE, GPA, years of work experience. And they're averages for a reason, but it will give you a sense of where you fall in terms of competitiveness in relation to others who might be applying for that same program. That doesn't mean you shouldn't apply for some that are a stretch and some that maybe are, I hate this word, but a little safer. But again, it'll give you a sense of where you are. And speaking of where you are, of course, another key piece of this is, do you like being where this school is located? If you love a big city, then perhaps a school in College Station, Texas, lovely as that might be, is not for you. If you love College Station, Texas, then applying for a school in Paris or Tokyo or DC or New York may not be the right place for you. So thinking about how you're going to spend 2 years of your life in a particular place and what it's like to be there is also something that should be part of your consideration for the process. As I'm sure many of you are already thinking about, wondering whether you can afford it, your personal comfort level with debt, your personal financial aid package and how that relates to your competitiveness, what sorts of things are going to be available. Again, that doesn't mean that you should apply or not apply to a program, but it should be part of your discernment process as you look at how comfortable you are with different things and how that relates to what's going to be possible at a particular school or program. I would argue the most important question on this list is the last one. What is next? What is the professional fit between that degree program and what you want to do the day after graduation, 5 years after, 10 years after, whatever? And if you're not sure how to really answer that, I think you can ask professors, mentors, your employer, read job descriptions. If you are looking at 10 different job descriptions that sound amazing, but for which you're not really yet qualified, see what are the common threads. Oh, they all say Master of Arts in International Affairs, 5 years on a field experience, and you have to speak Swahili. Well, okay, those are some good guideposts between where you are now and where you want to be if you want to compete for that job that you are going to need to tick off. So look at a particular program. Is it going to give you exposure to field experience? Do they teach Swahili? Is it going to be the right kind of program to set you up for those different pieces? You can also read the bios of people who currently have that job or are running organizations that you would love to work with. How did they get into that position? And again, it won't give you a roadmap, but it'll give you some signposts along the way to give you a good sense of what you need to do to be professionally fit for positions like that. So all of those questions can help as you read through all of the brochures and talk to schools and all of those different pieces and are trying to discern between programs. So when you're about 9 months out, that's when you take that really wide net and start to focus in on particular schools. We encourage you to reach out to admissions counselors. And as a quick tip, a great question you can ask them is about the priorities of the admissions committee. This will show you a little bit savvier interest or understanding of how the process works. And it'll also give you a sense of the kinds of things that you might want to highlight or ask your recommenders to highlight, because you know those are some of the key things that a committee likes to see when they're reading applications. 9 months out is also when we encourage you to think about the prerequisites that you might have to complete, standardized tests that you're going to need to do, anything that might be an easy thing to knock out in your application or a weakness in your application, because 9 months out will still give you a little bit of runtime. If you don't get the grade you want or the score you want on those pieces, you can take it again if you've done it this far out. We also encourage you at this point to start to put together the pieces of an application, because it's going to be a time-consuming process. So the more you can start to chip away at it at 9 months, the better and the easier on you that it's going to be. So typically, what are those application pieces? I cannot stress enough that every school is different, and that's why you need that spreadsheet and that tracking device to make sure that all the right pieces go to the right people. And I'm sure if you ask her, Asha will have some wonderful stories about applications going awry and a kid who might otherwise have been competitive had they actually been able to follow directions and turn the right things into the right place. But so every school is different, but the list that you see on your screen is a fairly common list of things that you're going to have to put together. You'll need an application form and an application fee. You'll need a CV or a resume, and those are two different things, so be sure you know which one it is that a school is looking for. You're going to need transcripts from every institution you've attended. So if you did that study abroad and directly enrolled in a university, again, this is a great thing to knock out 9 months early because it often takes a long time to process these things. All of these different pieces, you're probably going to need those standardized test scores, whether it's the graduate record exam, the GMAT, the LSAT, whatever it is. And again, be sure you know which one it is the school wants you to take and focus in on those and that one. You're going to need some personal statements and some essays, and we'll talk in a minute about some general best practices in putting those together. You're going to need a couple letters of recommendation, and I encourage you to think about who knows you best rather than who has the best title, because a letter of recommendation from the Pope or the President of the United States or someone that can only say, well, Mary is nice, she hasn't, murdered anybody this year to my knowledge, thanks. That's not the kind of letter that will really best serve your needs. They're going to want someone who knows you, who can talk about your skills, who can relate that, again, to what the program is looking for and really sees as the kind of students that are successful there. So make sure those recommendations tell the story you want and come from people who really know you rather than from people who are perhaps very well known. You may also need bank statements, particularly if you're applying for financial aid or if you're an international student moving to a new country. Oftentimes they're going to want to see those bank statements as part of the visa and the application process. So again, every school is different, but on the whole, these are a lot of the pieces you're going to need to put together. So 3 to 6 months out, this is really where the rubber meets the road. You started out with that wide net, you zeroed in on a couple of schools for deeper research, and now you've finalized your list of programs and you've started to build the pieces specific to each of those schools. We encourage you at this point to really reach out to those recommenders because they're going to need a good long lead time. I write a lot of letters of recommendation, and I can tell you I need a lot of prompting. So the longer run time you give them, the better you can ensure that they're going to turn it in on time. And again, you need to think about each of the pieces needed for each school. Your resume, 3 to 6 months out, that can be an easy thing to just get done because there's less chance that it's going to change a great deal. Requesting those transcripts, again, particularly from earlier institutions, because they're not going to change. And at 3 to 6 months, we encourage you to outline and start to build out all of those essays and personal statements to really tell your story. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. 3 to 6 months, again, is part of that dual process between applications and financial aid. Oftentimes, outside scholarships can be due around this point, so make sure you're meeting all of those deadlines, all of those application requirements. And if you need to retake some of those standardized tests or prerequisite courses, this is really a good time to do it. This is kind of your last chance, that 3 to 6 month out window, to make sure that you can give schools the best possible scores and grades. And then again, once you've asked your recommenders, be sure you continue to check in with them and make sure that they're on track to deliver what you need to get everything in by the deadline. So what makes a quality essay and personal statement? And Asha, I would be curious during your portion to hear more about what you see as you read applications. But what I hear from schools is really that they want to hear about the journey you are on. Who were you? What were the volunteer and the work and the life experiences, the academic experiences that shaped who you were? And how does that influence who you are now? Why do you want to study this particular issue? Why do you want to go to grad school now? Not 2 years ago, not 2 years from now. Why now? Why this program? Why this school? How is that informed by who you were and influenced by who you are? And particularly, how is it going to get you where you want to be? How is this experience going to be a springboard into that future version of yourself? I'm not necessarily saying you have to know exactly what job and exactly what field and write an essay that says, 15 minutes after graduation, I am going to do this and this. But schools want to understand how you have learned about their program and how that is a linchpin into the future of opportunity for you. So the more you can tell that story, the stronger your essays and personal statements will be, because it shows that you have been informed by these things, are at a current point in your life where you're ready to make this decision and see grad school as that continuation of the things that you have done in the past. So the more you can tell that story, which is, again, only distinct to you, I think the stronger your application can really be. So 1 month out is a wonderful and scary time, because this is the time when everything starts to get finalized. You're going to finalize those pieces for admission. You're going to finalize all of your financial aid documents. You're going to check in with all of the different pieces and people that you've been relating with for the last 12 months. And then comes a scary and wonderful day when you click submit and everything gets turned into the school. I can tell you from my own experience, it was a wonderful day, but a little terrifying. But it's the culmination of the last perhaps 12 months, if you've been following this plan along with us, and in all of the research you've done and all of the discernment you've done about why these particular programs are the right fit for you. Again, folks, if you have questions about anything I've said or haven't said, please feel free to put them in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. So what are some common mistakes that we strongly encourage you to avoid? First, of course, is the very simple not following directions. If a school asks for 3 letters of recommendation, turn in 3 letters of recommendation. Don't turn in 4, don't turn in 2, turn in the 3 that they asked for. If they ask for transcripts from every institution, get them. And if you're not sure, or if you think some things might get lost, it's perfectly okay to ask for extra copies. That way, if you find out that someone didn't get what you thought was sent, you're ready and you can just turn it in right there to the school and get it crossed off without having to go through the whole process of requesting it again. I also encourage you to proofread and get other people to proofread, whether it's a friend, a spouse, a partner, a roommate, a professor, someone who can check your work and make sure that you are putting forward the version of yourself that you think you are, and that it's typo-free and error-free. Another very common foolish mistake is to and that I would encourage you to avoid, is make sure that the right documents go in the right places. If you're applying to Georgetown, George Washington University, and Georgia Tech, make sure that the right things go to the right place. Because I'm pretty confident that if George Washington University reads an essay about how badly you want to go to Georgia Tech, they're probably not going to be compelled to admit you because you've made your whole case about going somewhere else. So that's a really simple thing to avoid, but just requires you to be careful and to keep track of all of those pieces like we talked about at the very beginning of the presentation. And the final one, and this is really the hardest, is be honest with yourself and with the school about your motivation and your skills and your interests. If there is some hiccup in your professional or academic or personal life that's going to clearly come through, let's say you had a really bad first semester as an undergrad and a really hard time transitioning to undergrad, or had a family emergency that caused a bit of a break, it's going to come through in your transcripts. So be sure to disclose any issues, maybe straightforwardly, and be honest about yourself and talk about how this was a learning experience for you. I'm not saying you have to tell your whole story or overshare, but be sure you disclose things in a clear and straightforward way. And if you're not sure where the line is between useful information and oversharing, again, be sure that you talk to a school and sort of feel them out and say, where is that line and how much of this do I need to share with you to explain why these particular things maybe have emerged. So unfortunately, even after the deadline, your work isn't done. You need to first and foremost make sure that everything you think you turned in was actually received. And then you need to thank all of the people who helped you along the way, particularly your recommenders. You never know when you're going to need their help or their insight or their recommendation again. So be sure that you stay in their good graces. You also need to continue to update your financial planning and continue to learn about programs. Because my hope for all of you is that you get into more than one program. And so you're still going to need to discern among them which one it is that you want to enroll, in which one you want to enroll. So be sure that you continue to learn about everything and continue to do that financial planning so that when you get your financial aid package, you're again ready to take decisions, move forward, and have lots of options on the table. So I know what I hear from schools about what they look for, but again, Asha, I hope you'll touch on a little bit about what you look for when you're reading candidates. But I think there's really several pieces to this. One, of course, is your chance of academic success in the program. It is a school, after all. So that's why they're going to want to look at transcripts. That's why they might ask for academic letters of recommendation. That's why they want to read your essays. They want to be sure you are set up to succeed in that academic program. And they also want to be sure that you're set up to succeed in a professional aspect of the program or professionally after the program. So again, that's why they're going to ask for letters of recommendation. That's why they're going to want to see your resume. That's why they're going to want to look at your personal statements about how this fits into larger plans. So each of those pieces is key, but there's also an element of wanting to put together a class that will enable others to succeed as well. So what is your distinct perspective on the world? What is your distinct set of life experiences that are going to help other people succeed academically and professionally? So that's, again, why they're looking for letters of recommendation, why they're going to want essays and personal statements, why they want to see your resume and your transcripts. What is really distinct that is going to elevate everything about that class and that experience for everyone? So we've talked about the application process. We've talked about how it is that you need to do financial planning at the same time as academic planning. And I know that for a lot of students, the financial aid piece is a key part of their consideration. So I want to stress to you all that there's lots and lots of different ways to pay for school. There's merit and need-based aid, and they are different, so be sure you know which one you're being offered. There are research and teaching assistant positions that are going to match you with a faculty member to either do research or teaching, as the name implies. There's assistance often from both the school and the central university, so you can sometimes ask for consideration for maybe central university funds to complement what a school is going to offer you. And that's, again, why building some of those relationships with programs can be a great thing, Because if you have a relationship, you can say to them, the money from the school is great, it's not enough to get me there. Might there be anything available on the central university level? And the worst thing that happens is they just say no. And that's all internal based, the research, the merit-based aid, the university financial aid. But then there's also a number of external sources of funding, grants and loans. And again, grants are going to be things that don't need to be repaid. Loans will need to be repaid, so be sure you know which one you're being offered. And then there's lots of different kinds of scholarships as well. And as you think about what kinds of scholarships and fellowships you might be able to compete for, I encourage you to think about lots of different ways to conceptualize yourself. And what you see here on the screen are just a few examples of the many different kinds of financial aid that are available. There are things like the Payne and the Wrangell and the Pickering fellowships, which are tied to your professional career goals. So both of those, or excuse me, all three of those are coupled with a job offer at the end to either work for the U.S. State Department or the U.S. Agency for International Development. So those might be things you want to compete for if that is your career plan. There are others that are tied to what you've done previously, like the Coverdell Fellowship that goes for returned Peace Corps volunteers. And that, in that case, it's about what you've done in the past in a professional, semi-professional context. There are also scholarships and fellowships based on where you live. So anyone who lives in the northern or southern hemisphere and is part of a country that's a member of the Organization of American States can compete for graduate level funding. So thinking about yourself as a citizen and a citizen of a country or of a region is also a great way to understand yourself and think about financial aid that way. It can also relate to, again, your geographic residency. It can relate to your nationality or your citizenship. So if you are Lithuanian, Latvian, Estonian, or of one of those descents, you can be competitive for the Baltic American Foundation scholarships. So thinking about where you live, as well as perhaps where your family lived or what ethnicity you are, can again be a piece of that competitive conception of self. The Public Policy and International Affairs program can also be for students who are typically underrepresented in a particular field. And so that couples skills training with funding for graduate school. So again, thinking about where you are, who you are, how you want to be, professional goals, career goals, maybe your gender, maybe your faith background, all of these different pieces can help you as you do your research and your discernment about what kinds of financial aid might be available. I want to talk very briefly before I turn the floor over to Asha about our field, the field of international affairs, and what you can do in many different contexts with a degree in IR. So many of you may know some of the traditional fields for international affairs like development or diplomacy or defense, but about 44% of our graduates go into the private sector, and they're working in a wide range of fields. They work on energy issues, they work in public communications, marketing, they work for the Walt Disney Company, they work for McDonald's, they work for lots of different companies, because the interdisciplinary training that our schools provide in history, in economics, in politics, in culture, in regional studies, and then the specialized training underneath each of those pieces really sets you up for success, whether you want to go into education, science and technology, all kinds of different pieces about how the world comes together can be approached through an international affairs degree. So if you haven't been thinking about it, I would be happy to talk with you more, and we have a number of resources on our site too to unpack what it might mean to have a degree in IR, international affairs, and how it can relate to lots and lots of different sectors. So one last word on being competitive, and I think this is true whether you're talking about jobs or grad school. I think there's a number of different skill sets that students need. One, of course, is professional experience. We typically recommend that students take a break between undergrad and grad school and go out into the world, and I think personally that helps with the discernment process as well as the application. Because if you've had professional experience, particularly on an international level, it just makes you that much more competitive. And I'm happy to talk about the different things that might count. And I would argue that it could be anything from being a barista to being a Wall Street trader, depending on how you spin it and put it forward. The ability to write well and speak comfortably in lots of different audiences is really critical and will help to separate you from your competitors and your colleagues. Because you can know everything there is to know about some topic, but if you can't convey it concisely and clearly in written form and to lots of different audiences in a presentation, all of that knowledge doesn't really do you any good. So be sure that you have the capacity to write well and speak comfortably, regardless of the audience. And if you're terrible at these two things, now is the time to practice. If you're currently in school, volunteer to be the one who gives that class presentation, even if it terrifies the hell out of you. Be the one who offers to write that brief memo or work with a nonprofit to volunteer to do some writing for them, and then get others to help you so that you can start to build up these skills, especially if these are things that you currently don't have. I think also understanding how ideas become reality is also a key thing. Know how money moves, know how you execute on a project. And again, you could do this in a university club, you can do this in your faith community, you can do this as a volunteer for a nonprofit. There's lots of different ways that you can get, quote, project management experience, but it's something that helps you be more competitive. It helps with your own understanding of the way things work. And it really helps you as you try to decide what's next, whether it's so that you can tell that narrative in your essay or just for your own personal understanding about what's going on in the world. And I also encourage you to think about how you can build your network. It could be your internship supervisor or your work study supervisor or your boss. It can be your peers and your classmates, people who participate in activities with you, sports teams, whatever. It can be the professors who taught you, whether that was 10 years ago or 10 days ago. It can be the alum of your particular institution or of a fellowship program, of the Peace Corps, of the VSO, of whatever it is that you've been a part of. So it doesn't just have to be academic alumni. It can be lots of different people who shared this experience with you and can maybe give you advice or open doors or give you some sense of guidance as you try to think about professional and academic next steps. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Asha, and she's going to unpack for you the different work that Yale is doing, and particularly their master's programs. Asha?
Yep, thanks, Carmen. So Carmen basically just covered a lot of ground, and I think this my presentation will basically show you in a more concrete way how some of the things that you mentioned in the context of our program. So just a little bit of history about our program, and I guess I should formally introduce myself. My name is Asha Rangappa. I am the Director of Admissions at Jackson. I am also a senior lecturer here. I came here from Yale Law School, where I was the Dean of Admissions for 12 years. And I'm also a lawyer and was an FBI agent before that. So what I will be teaching here next semester will be national security law, possibly, of course, on the history of the CIA and FBI. And you'll see how that fits in with some of the larger things that we have going on here at Jackson in different areas of international affairs. So what is the Jackson Institute? So Jackson is within the graduate program of Yale University. It is what used to be the International Relations program, but now is more international policy focused. The degree that we offer is a Master of Arts in Global Affairs. We also offer a one-year Master of Advanced Study, which I will tell you about. But by global affairs, this is a very broad, comprehensive, really anything that relates to foreign policy or international relations, which can often intersect with a lot of domestic issues. So just the outlines of these programs. So the MA program, which is the main graduate program that we have, is a 2-year program of study. It's focused on global leadership and service. Our entering classes are pretty small compared to many of the other policy programs out there. This year we had 25 students in the entering class, and it's fluctuated a little bit above and below before that. And as you can see with the list of areas that our students go into, it is very broad. So we have students who go into government, into nonprofit, and into the private sector. They're doing policy, national security, environment, all kinds of different areas, and there's no one clear-cut path. Just a few other things that are happening at Jackson in addition to our graduate program. So we have what we call senior fellows. These are basically people who've been out in the field, so to speak. So people who have been in the military, people who have been ambassadors to other countries, and they are appointed as senior fellows. They teach classes at Jackson, and they basically spend a lot of time in our building, which is kind of this homey building here in New Haven, very intimate community. And I've just listed here a couple of people. Emma Skye, who is an officer of the British Empire. She's a lecturer. She's an expert on ISIS. She's written books. We have Ambassador Rosemary DiCarlo, and she is the president of the National Committee on American Foreign Policy. And again, these are people who are teaching classes here at Jackson, and they attend lunches with our students. As I mentioned before, it's a small program, so you get a lot of interaction with them. We also have what we call World Fellows. These are basically people from around the world who are superstars, more or less, in their respective fields. And they are, you can go on our website and look at the list of World Fellows. They are people who are out in cybersecurity. We have the first female police chief from India who's here. And you notice that I said previously we have diplomats, journalists, rock stars. We literally have a Ukrainian rock star who is also has done policy work in the Ukraine. But also rock star in the metaphorical sense, meaning that these are all people who are incredibly accomplished, and they come here in the fall, spend several months here. They give talks. Just as an example of some World Fellow talks happening just today, there is one called Women in Security, Does It Matter? And this has a member of the Belgian Federal Parliament, the Indian female police chief I mentioned earlier, who will be giving this talk. There's another talk called Jihad in the Newsroom, another one called How to Win Elections in Africa. And again, these are being given by experts in these fields. These are our World Fellows. The last thing we have going on at the Jackson Institute is something called the Carey Initiative. So John Carey is one of our senior fellows, but he has his own program here, which brings in students from all different schools and departments in the university, including Jackson, and basically they work on policy issues. There's a class, there's workshops, and again, a lot of personal interaction, if this is what you're looking for, with a former Secretary of State. So that's just kind of some of the vibrancy of what's happening at Jackson. Now, for our students, our MA students, and I had mentioned, I just want to briefly mention, I had said that we also have a one-year Master of Advanced Study. That's its own program. It's typically for mid-career professionals who want to just get a one-year, deep dive into global policy. These are people who have significant work experience. The criteria is a little different there. They still take the GRE and everything, but if that's the program that you're interested in, we take very few people for that. Please email me directly because it's slightly different than what I'm going to be talking about for the MA, but because it's such a small program, I want to focus right now on the MA program because I suspect that that is what most of you are interested in. So our Master of Arts in Global Affairs is incredibly flexible. So there are 3 required courses when you first begin. This happens in your first term. And all of the first year students take it together. These are the 3 courses here: Applied Methods of Analysis, History of the Present, and Econ, Principles and Applications. Once those courses are taken, basically you then have free reign in the university at all the schools and departments to design your course of study. And this is incredibly I think is liberating for a lot of students, because if you have particular interests that may be similar to somebody else's, you may still want to explore them from a different perspective. So for example, national security is a very broad area. But if you're looking at how national security intersects with global financing, or like terrorist networks and financial networks, that is a whole different ball of wax than looking at national security and immigration and refugee policy, for example. They implicate very different themes. So you may want to approach this from different directions. And so what Jackson allows you to do is basically design an interdisciplinary course of study where you essentially pick and choose. It's like a little cafeteria. You go down and you pick and choose which courses really give you the right basket of classes that explores the topic that you want to look at from the perspective that you're looking at it. We do have an advisor here who helps you design that, and I think most students find it an incredibly exciting way to develop their expertise in their area of interest. I mentioned here language proficiency. Also, you do have to have language proficiency in order to graduate from Jackson. You can take the courses available in Yale's really extensive language offerings, or you can test out also if you already have a proficiency, and those details are listed on our website. One of the other exciting things about Jackson is we offer a number of dual degree programs. As you may know, my alma mater and my former employer, Yale Law School, has one of the best law programs in the country. Our business school, the Yale School of Management, is here. We have the School of Forestry and Environmental Management that does, if you're interested in environmental affairs, and then of course many of our other programs in the graduate school, as well as our School of Public Health and the medical school if you're thinking of becoming a doctor. You could really do a joint degree with any of these programs. You have to apply to the program separately and follow that school's requirements. So for example, if you want to do a joint degree with the law school, you need to apply to the law school. You would need to take the LSAT and fulfill all their components. But if you're admitted there and you are admitted to Jackson, what you're essentially allowed to do is use a semester of that program's coursework towards your master's degree at Jackson, and then that program would give you reciprocal credit to use a semester of your Jackson coursework towards that degree. And what that allows you to do is essentially shorten your total period of study by 1 year. Let's see. Just want to make sure I covered everything. Feel free to, in the Q&A, you can ask more questions about that because, again, some of the details differ depending on which program you're interested in. A quick note about financial aid. I know Carmen covered this. Jackson gives merit aid. We are incredibly generous with our aid. Here I've just listed a few of the different categories. We have general merit fellowships, which may award anything from half tuition to full tuition plus a stipend. We have international fellowships that are based on the regional background of the applicant or potentially what they're interested in studying. We have service fellowships for people with military backgrounds, or the Coverdell, which Carmen mentioned, for returning Peace Corps fellows. And on top of this, for all students, we have funding available over the summer. We give $5,000 for students who towards travel and working abroad. So lots of financial options here. All the students here, I think, are one of the things that they say about Jackson is how generous the financial aid has been. So I would just encourage you, there's nothing, this is based on merit. It's based on a full evaluation of your application, and in the event you're admitted, you get your financial package along with your award. What I would suggest is please mark on your application that you are interested in being considered for financial aid. it will not affect your candidacy. So in other words, your chances don't go up if you say, no, I'm not interested in financial aid. So mark it, then you'll be put in the bucket if you're admitted to be considered for any of these numerous sources of funding. And I'll just wrap up here in terms of applying to Jackson. Important, we do have a fee waiver in effect if you apply by December 1st. So you lose nothing by putting your hat in the ring. I encourage you to do so. We require 3 letters of recommendation. You can submit up to 6. I think that's a little overkill. I'm happy to answer questions about that. If you miss the December 1st deadline, you can still apply. You would have to pay the application fee, but our drop dead deadline is January 2nd. If you can take the GRE in December, even if you won't get those scores by January 2nd, as long as you submit your application by the deadline, whether if you're applying for the fee waiver by December 1st or January 2nd, it's okay if your scores and even if your recommendations come in after that. We do require, again, the TOEFL here for students who aren't native English speakers or did not attend an undergraduate institution which was taught in English. So that is basically my presentation. I know Carmen had wanted me to talk about things about, we are interested in students who are intellectually curious, have questions about the world that they want to answer. And to that end, what we want to see is an application package that has a demonstrated interest in global issues. And here your personal statement is going to matter in terms of articulating why you think the particular way that Jackson is designed that allows you to put together this interdisciplinary curriculum really makes sense for where you want to go. And I'm happy to elaborate on that. I find that answering students' questions is often the best way to cover that. And I know we just have a few, like 15 more minutes. So Carmen, I guess I'll open it up to questions, right? And they can type in their questions.
Sure. We have one question for you. And while more folks are typing with all sorts of good insights that we can share, I wanted to share 2 other things with folks while you're on the line. APSIA has a number of external links that will also enable you to look for more fellowship and scholarship opportunities, understand more grad programs, understand more career options. And then in particular, I wanted to highlight the upcoming events that we have. And what you'll see on that page, and you can see it's apsia.org/events, is a chance to get some more face time, literally and figuratively, with folks like Asha. It'll also give you a chance to learn about when they have open houses, so you can come to maybe see some of those faculty, get a feel for campus and the town of, let's say, New Haven. In particular, for anybody who happens to be on the line in Taipei and Seoul, unfortunately for our colleagues in Japan, we missed you, that was last night. But we'll have, again, some opportunities for FaceTime in those cities. And then Asha and 23 other APSIA schools will be online November 15th. So that's next Wednesday to, again, deliver some personal advice and information. And then we are available across all sorts of different channels, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., to answer questions. We often publish job opportunities, fellowships, internships, and lots of different other things. So I want to invite you all to begin to build those relationships through these great opportunities. And now we'll turn it over to questions and let you all pick Asha's brain, and if I can be of help, mine too. Asha, our first question is from John. He's wondering whether Yale super scores the GRE.
So I actually don't know what super score means. Do you mean like take the highest score from each of the sections if it's been taken multiple times? Yes, so you would submit all of your scores. I mean, I'll be honest with you, this is my first time moving into the graduate field from law school, but I can tell you how I always approach this issue from the law school perspective, which is I feel that the application informs the score more than the other way around. And so I look at a whole application and say, what is this application say to me? If this is an academically stellar student with a great record, with great recommendations, curiosity, interest, analytic skills, then yes, my inclination is to credit the highest scores of all of the different sections, because that seems what's consistent with the application. I think that if the rest of the application is subpar, even crediting the highest score will not necessarily do much for the application. But yes, we will look at all your scores, and I do think the highest one will generally be the one that carries the most weight.
I see a few folks typing, but since my mic is live and theirs isn't, I get the privilege of asking questions. Asha, when you all look at the question of work experience, is there a minimum requirement, and can students really talk about how anything might count, or are you really only looking for certain kinds of things?
So that's a great question. We don't require work experience, but most of our students had been out of school for a little while. And here's where I'll talk about how this relates to the personal statement. As you had mentioned before, what I look for in a personal statement is a narrative that connects the dots in someone's life, that explains what has led them to this point and this particular interest. Now, those dots could be personal experiences and background. It could be professional experiences. It could be ideas that you've encountered in class, or just, from being engaged in the world, or a combination of all of these things. But what I'm interested in is the why. Why did you make the choices you did before, and why Jackson now? To that end, I feel that work experience gives you more dots to connect. Most often when people have been out in the world, whether it's Peace Corps, or whether it's even like working for McKinsey, I mean, you encounter real world issues and problems, and begin to be able to apply some of the theory and academic knowledge that you had in new ways. So I find that typically people who have had some time to work generally have they have the potential to provide a more sophisticated explanation for what they're interested in and why they want to come to school. Having said that, it's not a requirement. It may be that some of the background and experience and international interest comes from where you grew up, or other things that are not related to work. So it's not a requirement, but I do think that it can be helpful. If you're making the choice between working a little bit before applying to grad school, I would say that might be a good idea.
And related to that, yeah, Zachary was wondering, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you were just going to read these guys. Go ahead.
Yes. So just to skip around a little bit, since I think it's connected to what you were talking about in the essays, Zachary was wondering, he would like to go to grad school to change course and gain experience in another field. And I love this question. What level of honesty would you recommend in conveying this interest in course change in the application?
Well, being a former FBI agent, I recommend honesty all the time. But, look, I find that the best applications are always the ones that are authentic. And if you try to write anything, a personal statement, or package your application in a way that you think is going to impress some imagined reader in your mind, that comes through. I mean, it sounds stiff. It's clear that there's something that's a little bit off. So it's just not going to work. And quite frankly, if you don't explain why you're making this change, it's just going to look like a 180 that is unexplained, and you look kind of aimless, and that you don't know really what you're doing. So I would say, if you have really thought about this, if you have done some reflection on why this major really wasn't leading you where you want to go, why this new path is going to lead you where you want to go, and where do you want to go? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? That's obviously going to make a much more interesting and compelling and basically coherent narrative for you in terms of your application. So I would say be honest about it, because otherwise there's just going to be an unanswered question.
I love that. Own the story that you're going to tell. I think that's great.
And I'm just reading Santiago's question here above, just so we don't skip him, that there are research opportunities about global governance or global values. Absolutely. So, there are research opportunities within the classes. Often there are, policy issues that the students are tackling within the classes, but even outside of that, if you want to be, for example, a teaching assistant, you can apply to those, and that's across the university. There are research assistant opportunities for the people who are at Jackson or, again, across the university and other schools. So, I mean, you're asking a very big question there, but the answer is yes. It really just depends on the specifics and in terms of how you would then pursue that, those opportunities.
I see a few other folks are typing, but when you look at 3 to 6 letters of recommendation, do you have advice that's either specific to Yale or more broadly transferable about whether students should divide those primarily towards academic, primarily towards professional, or some mix therein?
Yeah, so my personal inclination is, because this is an academic program, I would recommend that at least 2 of them be from faculty who have taught you. Because look, the bottom line is what you'll be doing here is being a student, and you'll be in class. And we want to know that you have the academic skills, the things that I mentioned before, the analytical skills, the curiosity, the critical thinking, the ability to write, as Carmen mentioned. All of those things are what we want to know, and typically academic recommendation will cover those things. I think, especially since as I've suggested, people do apply a little bit later after they've been out of school. I think it's totally fine to also include, a professional reference or 2, especially if those will underscore some of your interest in international affairs or policy or particular issues. So those can help ground and bolster those parts of your application. But even if you've been out of school for a while, I would not forego the academic references. If you absolutely cannot get one, that's a different story. Then I think, you can try to get professional references that speak to the kinds of things that academic references do. But your capacity as a student is important, and so I would not, if you can get academic references, I would try to get at least 2.
As a quick note on that, I would actually encourage students, that's a great question to ask at things like grad school fairs. Some schools may have really different answers, so that's a very savvy thing, again, that you can ask to show and to learn more about what the program's priorities are.
Great. So we have Cristobal asking, how open is Jackson to accepting people from different backgrounds? Want to know if I'll be at a disadvantage compared to people with political science, economics backgrounds. So I have to demonstrate something. No, not at all. I think that diversity of background would be valuable and will definitely stand out. What I would say, though, is, again, whatever your background, you need to demonstrate an interest in international issues. So I don't know what you were covering as a journalist, but if you were covering those areas, that would definitely be a great, thing to highlight. The other thing that I would say is one advantage that political science and economic background people may have is basically some grounding in economics classes. Now, we do require an Econ 101 and 102. You don't have to have taken them in order to apply, but we do want you to have those courses by the time you matriculate at Jackson in the event that you're admitted. Just because we do have, as I showed you before, 2 of the required courses in your first term are quantitative, and we do want you to have the basic grounding in economics. So, some of that quantitative background can be already present with somebody who has this the political science or econ background, which could be helpful to them. But I think that the journalism background is not at all on its own inherently a disadvantage at all. Okay, so Recommendations, if we have potential recommendations, his first language is not English. Well, I would get it translated. I mean, I speak two other languages. I speak Spanish and an Indian language called Kannada, but there will be multiple readers for your application. So you do need to get that recommendation translated. You may have waived your right to see that recommendation, in which case I would suggest that you find, maybe you ask or get someone to help your recommender translate it into English before it's submitted. I mean, Carmen, I don't know what else to suggest on that one.
So do you recommend that the person write it in their native language and then translate it into English, or work to write it in English from the get-go?
I mean, I personally don't know what to say on that. I mean, I need to be able to read the recommendation in English is basically the bottom line, right? I mean, it's just not helpful to get a recommendation in Russian, for example. So it's, it needs to be a written English recommendation. So whatever way the recommender needs to go about doing that, they need to do that. In terms of why might a school request a CV over a resume, I mean, I use those really interchangeably, to be honest. My sense is that the CV is typically a little bit longer, and I tend to prefer shorter, like the one-page business resume. I don't think there's a preference. I typically feel that unless you're an academic with significant publications, you don't really need multiple page resumes. And because you do have the personal statement to give your narrative of the things that are important and that have mattered in what you've done, that's where I think most of the focus will be. So, and Carmen, again, you see more of this from a bird's eye view. So I don't know if you have anything to add about this in terms of why a school might request one over the other.
I think there's two cases. One would be more of an academic or even a PhD program compared to a professional level master's. And the other might be a US context versus a European or a non-US context. I think, for example, our members in Europe, France, Switzerland, they might go either way, but they might see more CVs typically than resumes, just given the professional atmosphere there. So if they ask for one over the other, again, it's perfectly reasonable to say, which do you prefer or what are you looking for? If it's a PhD program or a heavily intensive academic program and they give you the choice of one over the other, I encourage you to go CV, just because that is the typical document of the discipline.
Yeah, that's helpful. And I think that makes sense of what I've said. I would say that, although obviously it's an academic program here, like I said, I think the faculty recommendations will speak to that piece of it. We don't expect people here to have, extensive publications or advanced degrees and all of that. So I think a shorter resume that lists your professional experience would be sufficient.
Great, so we're at time, but if anyone has any last minute questions they'd like to sneak in while I'm talking, and you can type fast, go for it. Again, I encourage all of you to join us at different events and again get some even deeper answers from Asha and her colleagues at different schools. If you would like to email me, and you see my email address right there on your screen, carmen@apsia.org, I'm happy to share this copy of the slides. Asha, we'll have a recording of this. Would you be comfortable with me sharing that with different folks?
Yes, and I hope some of these students will join the online fair, which, as you mentioned, we'll be at.
And so I look forward to seeing all of you at future APSIA events. Please feel free to email me again for the slides or the recording. And if you missed a good chunk of this presentation, we will repeat it in December. Sadly, we will not be featuring the Jackson School at that time, but I do know that they have several events coming up where they will be highlighting themselves, and you'll also have a chance to really get to know their wonderful program. Yes. So with that, folks, I'm going to close out, and we very much appreciate your time and being here, and I look forward to seeing you at future APSIA events.